I make this case that the system has been trying to thermodynamically correct for the last 20 years, and we've been using quantitative easing to prevent that from happening. So I make the case this started in the oil industry, and a major economic correction, the GFC of 2008, the largest one since the 1929 Great Depression, did not resolve the problems. So it's not speculation. And that to show that the change started 20 years ago, it's not something that might happen next year or 50 years from now. Bloomberg makes the case that we've got an oil glut. So how's that work? So this is, I don't see myself in conflict with that analysis. So the orange line is natural gas liquids from the gas industry. Natural gas liquids. And they've been using that to produce the lighter fractions of gasoline and jet fuel. And for that reason, supply of crude oil, that it's on the downward slope now, is not being noticed. 2030 seems to be a crunch point. That's when the Great Reset was supposed to happen. The World Economic Great Reset. Yep. And there's going to come a point where we get to this point, and then it's crunch time, and the voting public will realize that nothing has been done. And then they'll say, well, maybe nothing was really intended to be done. So the whole thing for me is starting to look like a PR exercise to keep us occupied. A public relations exercise to keep the punters on the ground occupied. Stay at your posts. Use your credit card. Your government's got it worked out. US dollar / European Union euro / the Chinese yuan, they're all fiat currencies saturated with debt, trying very hard to correct. Currency debt default, meltdown, like a new currency system will take its place. You're seeing points, you can see markers for it, that it's being planned for. You can see it inferred.
You can see it in the gold price.
So, what it tells me that the people doing that won't come out and openly discuss what they're doing. Tells me that the voting public on the ground are going to eat the losses. We're about to be hung out to dry.
You're watching CapitalCosm. My name is Danny. Today's guest is Simon Michaux. We've had Simon on a number of times on the channel, and it's always a pleasure hearing from you, Simon. Thanks for coming on.
G'day, Danny. Good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. Let's go ahead and dive right in. I know you have some interesting data in front of us, but let's go ahead and kick things off whichever way you want to kick it off. What's on your radar right now?
So, that's an interesting question. What's on the radar? So, I'm doing a lot of work where I've got the purple transitions on the ground now. And so I'm putting together the idea of teaching it. And I'm teaching around 5 case studies if we were to do it. And things like a town of 50,000 people, or a mine site, or a smelter, or the port of Rotterdam. And I think I was going to do the nation state of Germany. So anyway, so I've talked to people all over the world, and what's actually happening at the moment is a lot of the ideas that I put on the ground 7 or 8 years ago, which at the time sounded somewhat crazy, are now being validated. And a lot of the people who were traditionally really strong critics are now talking to me like they're telling me my own analysis from a couple of years ago. It's actually, I suppose you'd call it validation.
You've been vindicated, my friend.
Vindicated, yeah. So, I presented my work to the private banking sector in Westminster, in London, and they said, look, we already know this stuff. You're just confirming what we already know. And this was a little bit after the blackout in Spain and Portugal, and they said, look, we're pulling out of the green transition, and we're moving towards gas-fired gensets. But what's interesting, when you cross-reference, cross-interrogate them with some basic questions, they had no idea what the gas industry was. It's just like any other. There's that's the next century for our money.
Well, I've been interviewing you for 3 years now, Simon, and the impression that I got was that they were always clueless every time you brought this stuff up to them.
So normally when you go before their education, their worldview is a series of platitudes. A series of platitudes of what they like set sayings. The market will fix it. The market will tell us what to do. the free market is gone. There's a series of beliefs, and when I put biophysical reality in front of them, people say, "Well, that's obvious." And now that you say it out loud, I suppose we can't refute it. And they go, "Oh, gee, Anyway, so things have shifted. Now, there've been a number of failures, very public failures for solar panels and wind turbines over the last couple of years, and there's been and also for electric vehicles as well. There's been a number of problems that have been highlighting that maybe our plan wasn't going to work. So I'm seeing a bit of bifurcation. The private sector, the ruthless corporations that work on the idea of investment. Where's our money? What are we going to do if we get this wrong? We're out in the street. They've all quietly done the numbers themselves, and they've all quietly moved on, as in they get it, but they still won't look to the solution because it's a little crazy for them. Then you've got the groups of government organizations like the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, the IMF. That's set. Academia, governments around the world, they're all still, we're going to double down on wind turbines and solar panels in the green transition. So I'm seeing a bifurcation. I am also getting less. I used to get quite a lot of people talking to me in an aggressive fashion. That's happening less now. And instead I'm getting silence. And to be honest, I prefer the silence. Anyway, so
quiet can't hurt, right? I mean, it's like the old adage goes: first they mock you, then they fight you, then they say you were right all along, Simon. We were right there with you the entire time.
There's actually another undercurrent in there. It says they don't necessarily say you were right all along. It says we were right. You're just catching up to us. It pays to have a sense of humor with these sorts of things and just not take yourself that seriously, because it is quite a thankless task to work on. So anyway, so what I've been doing is the analysis I put together for today is the energy sector, as in terms of what's our status at the moment, but not just one. I've done oil, gas, coal, and uranium. What's the current status, and how does it relate back to our economics?
Okay.
Right, and so then once we've done that, what I've got prepared for in recently the European Union went in and did what that was called the Critical Raw Materials Act, where they were basically going to write certain things into law. And for example, 10% of mining of metal that Europe needs for the green transition will come from European mines by 2030. And so, well, how many power stations is that? And so I've actually done the numbers for that, and then I've actually been talking to, there's been 4 or 5 examples where I've talked to people right across the value chain within the European system, and this is how are we going with all that? And so there's some fundamental insights that we can discuss at the end of that. So even though we're going to start with energy, it's going to end in a different place.
I see.
If all goes well.
Sounds good. Let her rip.
Okay, so how do I share? Okay, down the bottom, got it. So I will production, industrial production for economic value. And so what you're looking at here is from BP statistics, world primary energy consumption in exajoules for the whole world up against GDP for that same year. And it's from 1960 to 2022. So it's after it's over the last 62 years. And
it doesn't get any better than that R squared value. 97% of the variability is predicted by the energy consumption of the world.
Yeah. So it's right there is energy. Energy is something we should be watching very carefully. So let's unpack that. So here is electricity generation versus economic activity. So now we've got the biggest 77 economies in the world of 193. Right, so world GDP for each nation in the year 2024. And now each of those countries did electricity generation, and we've got an R squared of 0.68 or 0.69, I suppose, which is, again, pretty good. And that's sort of what we expect. Electricity, economic value. Yeah, but watch this. If we were to break that up into, say, European Union, BRICS, and the rest of the world, so Europe is below that line and BRICS is above that line. Why is that? And so what I'm sort of getting at, and the R-squareds are become quite good again. And so what I'm sort of saying here is we should, instead of modeling one size fits all and one analysis for every one, there's actually different subpopulations we should be looking at. That's not rocket science, but in the mineral intelligence world, you tend to sort of see these like broad sweeping analysis that catch everyone and everything. So it's got to be more contextual. What are the rules that put an economy on the blue line versus the red line? Right, so here's energy. So as it turned, this is energy up to 2024, 1800 to 2024. As you can see, even now, 82% is still fossil fuels.
Yeah, and it seems like we just keep on stacking different energy sources on top of each other. We never really get rid of a lesser efficient form of energy.
We don't. Watch this. So oil, gas, and coal do different things. But so let's put oil, gas, and coal together. So that's the red. And we've got 2 years, 2010 to 2024. Nuclear and hydro is grey, and your renewables, wind and solar, are the yellow. So between 2010 and 2024, the system increased 75.5 exajoules for fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. But in 2024, the total renewables fleet together was less than half of that. So not only has the system expanded, but all the effort we've gone through to actually putting renewable systems on the ground have not actually phased out anything at all. Right? And they're just, as you said, stacking on top of each other. Mm-hmm. So here is the chart that you've seen before. This is oil, and I make the case oil is the master resource. So I've got oil, gas, and coal and uranium to show you now. So remember this chart, R-squared 0.93. That's all data raw as it comes in. GDP versus total liquids. Now, total liquids is everything you put into an internal combustion engine tank, fuel tank, like gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, biofuels, gasoline made from natural gas liquids. It's all summed together. And it's very hard to unpack information under that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I've broken that up into Europe, BRICS, and the rest of the world. But that R-squared is all numbers on that chart. Okay. So there's the larger European economies. There's the United States, United Kingdom, and there is BRICS. So why do we care about oil? And again, this is an old slide, but it puts it in context with how I end. This is the metal price for the World Bank back to 1960 in monthly resolution data. And what I've done is I've indexed the price numbers to the number 100 and the month of December 2001. And the reason I do that is you can show periods of relative stability. In January 2005, that happened. Something happened where everything blew out. So the gold coupled to standard, the US dollar decouples from the gold standard, the oil embargo of 1980, the global financial crisis is in that little, in there. Mm-hmm. And the quantitative easing era, of which will be used to fix it, and COVID-19, the gift that keeps on giving. Now, you might notice that as we are going along, the swings are getting bigger. I make this case that the system has been trying to thermodynamically correct for the last 20 years, and we've been using quantitative easing to prevent that from happening. So I make the case this started in the oil industry, and a major economic correction, the GFC of 2008, the largest one since the 1929 Great Depression, did not resolve the problems. So it's not speculation. And that to show that the change started 20 years ago, it's not something that might happen next year or 50 years from now. So what happened? Here is oil production. So oil supply plateaued. It was not able to expand, but demand continued to increase. Now, Saudi Arabia, the swing producer of the day, was asked to increase production. Now, their production is the black line, solid black line. That actually went down And so they then, this is the graph of oil rigs, like the number of rigs they've actually got drilling for oil. They brought on 146% increase in rig count in exchange for a 4% contraction in oil production. So in other words, they weren't able to increase then. So that's the same point. Okay, see that dip there? That is the invasion of Iraq. So Iraq, as an oil producer, went offline completely, and a number of other oil producers contracted at the same time. So there was 4.2 million barrels a day went offline. Imagine if that happened now. So the Iraq war happened. The Saudis were asked to step in and make up the shortfall. They couldn't. Oil plateaued.
Would something to that effect be comparable to like Iran shutting down the Straits of Hormuz?
Yep, that'll be worse.
Okay,
that will be worse because 80% of the oil that all the oil that goes to China, for example, goes through that area, or a massive proportion of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll have a bigger ripple effect. And so here's supply and demand for oil. It's very hard to get a chart that shows supply and demand in the same units. And there's oil price, not adjusted for inflation. Now, the fact that I've got to say that's a flag. All right, so oil production plateaus for a couple of years. Within that time, supply and demand did separate, and that correlates with the price spike. Remember, at the time of GFC, at the time it was speculated that it was speculators in the oil trading platforms that caused the whole thing. Well, actually, it was both.
So that oil price spike at the very bottom chart you see there, you've got it. You've got the little arrow pointing at it. It's the highest value at what, $130 some odd dollars. If you go up to the top chart, you'll notice there's this big gap between the red and blue line, showing a gap between demand and supply, i.e., demand outpacing supply. I think that's probably the biggest gap we've seen up to that point on that chart.
Correct. And actually, after that, supply and demand that they added extra things into the supply, which is why supply and demand separate after that. It's very hard to actually get proper information. So there's the global financial crisis, and there's quantitative easing. So the whole GFC went away because we started printing money. And what we printed back then has been eclipsed many times. Like what we printed for COVID is many times what we did back in 2008. 2009, an evolution in the horizontal oil drilling industry made the fracking industry viable, and it took off. So I make the case that the global financial crisis was caused by a chain reaction with its genesis in the oil industry. Quantitative easing resolved the problem, and fracking or tight oil were able to make up the shortfall supply. And the US is now the global industry swing producer, with the majority of growth, like 95% of growth since then, coming from tight oil. So supply and demand from that point on also included biofuels. And because they added biofuels, they didn't line up anymore on the chart. And I think they did that on purpose to try and obscure this. So if we go back to here, the system had a blowout in January 2005, which put strain on everything. 3 years later, the weakest link broke, which was the US subprime mortgage industry that caused the global financial crisis that was felt around the world. We fixed it by printing money. That's from an industrial ecology point of view, it's been trying to thermodynamically correct, and we haven't been letting it. And when we stop kicking the can down the road, that pattern will then unfold, only it will be much, much exacerbated. It's just a question of when. All right. So here is oil discovery. Most of it was discovered in the 60s and 70s. There's Gawa, the big one there. And with each year we're extracting more and more. The net inventory of discovery was 1985. That was the maximum amount of reservoir that we had. And so for the last, gosh, was that 40 years? We've been on a downward slope. So here, this is from Art Berman, Labyrinth Consulting. He does some nice work. Hey,
so does that imply peak oil was in 1985 then?
No, not peak oil. Peak discoveries.
Yeah,
maximum discoveries, maximum assets on the book on the balance sheet. How much oil do we have to market? 1985. So what we call peak oil has to evolve now. So here is oil production. So there's the raw data. And so this is some analysis stuff put on top of that. So there's a few things here. So we've got a localized peak oil November 2018. I think that actually is peak oil, as in peak amount brought to the market. There's COVID, the gift that keeps on giving, the supply disruptions. But the real breakthrough on this chart, this is from Art. We've been on a plateau since around January 2015. We have not been able to climb off the plateau. Now, in the background, 2016, HSBC did a study where 81% of oil reserves are being depleted at a rate ranging between 5 and 15%. So this is now a red queen market. We're running very fast just to stand still. Now, on top of that, we don't notice this because our demand for total liquids is going up and up each year, and we've been able to meet supply. And I think you were talking before, Doomberg makes the case that we've got an oil glut. So how's that work? So this is, I don't see myself in conflict with that analysis. So the orange line is natural gas liquids from the gas industry, natural gas liquids. And they've been using that to produce the lighter fractions of gasoline and jet fuel. And for that reason, supply of crude oil that it's on the downward slope now is not being noticed. And you can say, all right, we've got a supply glut. Why is that? No one's got any money. Because at the same time now we're saturated with debt and economic productivity is down and no one's got a job. And so the supply glut. I don't have data to say one way or another, but that doesn't surprise me, and to me that doesn't refute this analysis. What this tells me, though, is we believe that in growth-based economics, and we believe by 2050 that the whole economic system and the industry that supports it is going to be between 2 and 3 times the size it is now. This chart tells me that is not going to happen. And that means what we call growth-based economics is about to be eclipsed by something else. And, well, you can speculate what that is, but you could say contraction-based economics.
Degrowth.
Degrowth, yeah. Or is it strategic national security-based economics where oil is just taken off the market? But that chart that I showed before where oil correlates with GDP tells me that we have not thought about what taking oil out of our economy will look like at all. If it correlates so strongly, right, when we get to the end of this, I'll pull it up again. If it correlates so strongly, we haven't even begun to consider what would happen if we were to replace it with something else. Well, we don't even really know what that is. Right. So there's our possible peak oil. I actually think as time goes on, that's actually more and more likely. But what we call peak oil is actually not the real point. Like you could make a case that date of November 2018 is an outcome of a geopolitical push to try and sort of make that happen, and it was a short-term gain. All right, okay, but the idea that we've got a plateau for such a long time while everything's declining, that tells me a lot. Right, so here's Spain normally, and there's Spain. When the lights went out, the banking system said, well, we've got a new plan, we're going to fall back on gas-fired generators. And the way they said it, we're going to fall back on gas gensets, which means don't waste our time. We've got it in hand. We know what we're doing. Why don't you just stand in the corner and have a drink? And it was very dismissive. And so what I'd show them now is this. Have you noticed anger gets shit done? Well, that pissed me off, and that inspired me to do this. So here's our natural gas analysis.
Okay.
GDP now against natural gas consumption. And so here's the raw data. So the tight correlation of oil is broken down. But if you were to put in, say, Europe and BRICS and all that, well, okay, you can start to sort of see there's two populations there. But if you were to go Group 1 and Group 2, where Group 3 is in both, and then so, well, there's the R-squareds. Okay, so we've got two subpopulations. So then the question is, well, what's in these? What countries are on the blue line and what countries are on the red line? Mm-hmm. Well, so let's do Group 1, the blue line. So there's Group 1. So what I've done here is the countries are listed, but if they are actually producing any oil and gas at all, they're in the first two columns. But if either gas or oil is more than 1%, they're highlighted in red. And here is Group 2. And there's Group 3.
Okay.
So Group 2 and 3 are the red line at the top. Group 1 and 3 are the blue line on the bottom. And it's not perfect, but you can sort of see a pretty strong correlation there. What you could come up with is say, well, the bottom line is finished goods consumers, and the top one is commodity producers.
I see.
And Group 3, you have the full value chain. United States and China have everything.
So the consumer countries benefit the most from a unit change in natural gas consumption, it appears.
Yeah, correct.
Is that on the? Oh, sorry. It's So actually, hold on. Let me rephrase that. The bottom countries, the finished goods consumers, see the greatest uptick in natural gas consumption for every unit change in GDP.
I think that is correct, but you've also got the blue line uses technology to consume less energy, whereas the red line, because they're less developed economies, and they tend to spend most of the time extracting and producing commodities, it's much more energy intensive. And the red line tends to be the blue line, tends to be the customer of the red line most of the time.
I see.
So so more needs to be done to unpack this, like what really separates those groups out. So, but anyway, so that I thought was interesting. But this is what I'd show those banker guys. This is natural gas with the same problem. It's same basic profile as oil. Most of it was discovered in the 60s and 70s, and we're producing more and more each passing year. So net inventory gain now is 1995. And the midpoint production, as in half the gas that's ever been produced, has been produced since 2003, or in the last 22 years. Right, so the idea that this will carry us on for the next century is rubbish. So here's coal. Same analysis. This is all from John Peach. It's formerly of the MIT laboratory. Again, he does some very, very nice work. So now we've got the net inventory gain in 1975, and we've been on the downward slope ever since. Right, so the last 50 years or so. But we've got so much coal left that there's no problems. Like when you look at gas, we've got no problems now. There's plenty of gas if you've got the money to buy it, which that's becoming the problem, or the geopolitical supply of that gas. But if all things being equal, we're allowed to access it, we've still got a good 10 years of production before there's a problem. Oil is looking a little dicey in terms. There are problems in the oil industry that are now visible in the data. That will happen in gas, I think, something like 10 years away. And the time it takes to actually build stuff in gas, that's when things get interesting. So there's coal. So let's put coal in the same analysis. Okay. GDP versus coal consumption. And the relationship breaks down. There's nothing there. I haven't been able to pull apart that. And that's interesting because coal accounts for 34% of electrical production and 72% of thermal heat for industry. So coal actually, according to the numbers, is our greatest energy consumption fuel, but it doesn't seem to bear any sort of relation with economic value.
Interesting. So, in the case of oil and gas that you just outlined, an increase in GDP would predict an increase in consumption,
Yep.
and then vice versa. A decrease in GDP would presume a decrease in production. This is kind of like the idea that, when you're entering a recession, you would expect the oil price to come down. That's often the argument that I hear cited as to why the oil price is still relatively subdued. Is because we are entering a recession, or already in a recession, and so forth. But with coal, there is no relation. In other words, economic activity does not predict coal consumption. Is that correct?
Correct. No, I believe so. There's a very weak correlation there, but it's weak.
So if I'm investing in coal stocks, the fact that we're entering a recession bears no concern to me, given this analysis?
I would no. What I would do is I'd invest in coal, not to make money, as in whether the price goes up or down, but the fact we will always need coal, and it will be a foundation bedrock of your portfolio that will always deliver dividends.
I see.
So there's a couple of reasons to buy stock. Some you buy to speculate, and price goes up and you sell them to make a bit of cash. And the other one is to actually keep a bedrock, to actually keep regular income turning over.
All right, makes sense.
So that's not investment advice, by the way. That is my fevered dreams fueled with coffee and whiskey.
Yeah, nothing we say here is investment advice. It's on the disclaimer at the start of the show. So
all that. Okay. So here's uranium. So on the left, we've got nuclear electricity generated by nuclear power up against GDP. And on the right, you've got mining production of uranium. And I haven't been able to work out if there's subpopulations here. It does look like if I was to isolate that line there, which countries are they? And then you've got that line there and then that line there.
Run a little cluster analysis, figure it out.
When I actually, but there's not very many points here. So this is dangerous. You're getting to the point where you're looking for things that aren't there. So I haven't been able to pull out patterns out of this one yet. But certainly, we're not getting the strong correlation. So that's the energy. So let's go back to oil. Now that you've seen the others, so oil is the master resource. Look at that correlation. Look at that tightness. That's a log.
I don't see the screen. You unshared it.
Oops.
Okay, quick break to talk about today's sponsor. It's Clean Core Solutions. Ticker symbol ZONE on the New York Stock Exchange. If MicroStrategy was Bitcoin's institutional bridge, Clean Core is doing the same for Dogecoin. It's the official Dogecoin treasury, professionally managing and growing Doge with full transparency and institutional grade custody through Bitstamp by Robinhood. Clean Core isn't just holding crypto, they're building utility around it in partnership with House of Doge, the corporate arm of the Dogecoin Foundation. They're driving real-world use cases, payments, tokenization, and structured yield products. They've also executed a disciplined capital strategy, consistently purchasing Doge towards their 1 billion Doge target. As of October 6th, 2025, the Treasury holds over 710 million Doge, with $20 million in unrealized gains and enough cash on hand to keep buying more. Backed by Bitstamp by Robinhood. That's HOOD on the NASDAQ. The company is also backed by Pantera, Mosaic, Falcon X, and GSR, and led by Alex Spiro, Elon Musk's lawyer, as chairman. Doesn't get much bigger than that, does it? With Marco Margiotta, a fintech veteran who sold his last company to Pfizer as CIO. For investors, Zone, Z-O-N-E, Clean Core Solutions offers a regulated, transparent way to gain exposure to the institutional side of Dogecoin. Not just the currency, but the infrastructure powering its next era. This is where meme meets Wall Street, and big thanks to Clean Core for supporting the channel. Now let's get back to the interview.
Of course I did. You got it?
Yep.
Okay, so look at this correlation. This is oil again. look how tight that correlation is. A couple of things here. Chris Martenson made the statement that what you see here is high GDP, high total liquids consumption. Low GDP, low total liquids consumption, no exceptions. So from that, you say we're a petroleum-driven economy, even now, since 2024. Right, so, okay. The second thing to say here is we have not considered even a little of our dependency on oil at all. We have not really done the work to consider if oil is knocked out, what do we replace it with? If we've got that strong a correlation still. We just have not done the work. Now, the third statement, I'm still getting my head around what this actually means. But that total liquids is our transport, internal combustion engine transport, mostly. Cars, trucks, diesel trains, marine transport. So we're a transport-driven society. That is a better correlation than any other resource I've seen, including electricity. Electricity with the raw numbers was 0.69. Right, so the raw data, without any sort of subdivision, is over 0.9. So we are a transport-driven society. Why is that more important? Not electricity, not manufacture of goods, not food production. Transport, moving things from A to B.
Yeah.
Right. So.
And moving ourselves from A to B, especially here in the United States.
So, okay. So the next thing to show. So, is this still sharing the screen okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So this was, I did an analysis for the European Union in 2023 when they were debating about what should be in the critical raw materials, the Critical Raw Materials Act for Europe. And so this was the data I put together at the time. So the total metal produced to phase at one generation at 28 days buffer. So 28 days for wind and solar. There's been a lot of criticism about that, but I've since done a study in Hawaii, the state of Hawaii, to show that the size of the buffer to balance out summer versus winter is 28.8 days in Hawaii, using the best solar panel technology had to offer at the time based on measurements of solar radiance in Hawaii. So 28 days, the red is actually not a bad estimate. The real number is probably higher if we were to go this route. So as a contrast, I had 48 hours plus 10%. So the yellow is reported reserves, mineral reserves, as in things that are ready to go to open a mine. And the black is metal production. So this is the GTK bulletin that I put together, the peer-reviewed study. And this is a log scale. So current metal production for the year is many years behind. So it's a log scale. So here we're up around like 3,000 or 4,000, but production is around the 20, as in million tons.
Right. Scaled in orders of magnitude.
Yeah. All right. So now we're looking just at Europe. So now in the they made a few things for the Critical Raw Materials Act, and that's on the last slide of this set. But in the Paris Agreement, EV30, it's collectively reached 30% of market share for electric vehicles in all modes except two-wheelers by 2030. So here you've got to do that. This is quantity of metals just for Europe and 30% of Europe. Right, so the red is the column we need to catch. The black is total metal production. So what I've got in the columns down here, so these are copper, nickel, lithium, cobalt, and vanadium. And so the numbers highlighted in red here are the total metal required for one generation based on the 28-day buffer to 30% for Europe. Right, so the number of years of global mining production to hit that target from when I did this analysis is the column on the right here in red. So we get 5 years of global production would have to go into Europe all copper production globally would have to flow into Europe and then be converted into stuff to get on the ground to hit that target if we were to do that. And nickel is 17 years, lithium's 280, cobalt 60 years, and vanadium was 175 years. So we need a vast amount of metal from somewhere. Okay, so what involved with that? So the 76 million electric vehicles with 3.4 terawatt batteries. That's the 30% phase out for just Europe. 1.7 million hydrogen fuel cells. The capacity to annually produce, transport, and store around 3 million tons of hydrogen, and an extra 892 terawatt hours of electrical power generation. So let's look at that. So we need 892 terawatt hours. And according to the splits that we're using for the International Energy Agency, this is the expanded capacity. This is the 30% mark. This is the estimated number of additional new power plants of average size by 2030. That's in 5 years away now, a little under 15,000. Right, a little under 15,000 power stations, where 5 new nuclear plants, 4,209 wind turbine arrays, 10,349 solar PV arrays, 15,000 units. Where all the song and dance you've got to go through to just open one of these is extraordinary. So stationary power storage, depending on which threshold you agree with, I'm not clowning around anymore. 28 days is the number that is what this analysis is bearing out. I'm not interested in dealing with people who can't deal with reality. They genuinely think 5 to 7 hours will balance the difference between winter and summer. And the current excuse is when the sun doesn't shine, the wind is always blowing, and that is not true either. I've got data to show
that's what I was going to say. That's a pretty big bet. That's a pretty big thing to hang your hat on. I wouldn't want to be wrong.
Well, I had a debate on one of the podcasts where someone came in and they were as arrogant as a couple of French guys. And they said, we're just going to balance the difference in wind and solar. And it was like I was saying something very unreasonable when there's no such examples on the ground. And so I got the data from the United States to show that that's actually not going to work. And so next time I meet those guys, I'm going to bring out that information. Anyway, so here's what these are the metrics for what the European Critical Raw Materials Act was to say. There's, so 30% of fossil fuels is phased out by 2030. 10% of that, of our metal needs, are going to be sourced from European mines. So this is what's going to come from Europe. So use these numbers here, 28 days. There's global metal production, 2019. This is how many years of production we would need to be operational within Europe. So lithium, for example, the equivalent of 28 years of global production needs to be operating within Europe by 2030. The number of mines that represents is extraordinary. So 40% of metal has got to be refined and smelted in the European Union. So 40% of that doesn't come from the ecosystem of Southeast Asia. It now comes from Europe somehow. So we need the equivalent of 112 years of production capacity operating each year within the European borders. And 15% of that metal will go through recycling. This is by 2030.
I mean, this looks like game over, Simon. What are they going to do?
Well, funny you should mention that. And the reason I bring this up, hang on, how do I? The reason
you can't see like any feasible way that they can actually meet these targets. So it's like, how are they going to react to this?
I go all around the world. I talk to people all over the place, and there's been 4 or 5 examples where I've talked to people about this. Like, what's happened? Have you actually gone out and done this? And there's one guy in particular I was talking about, who's based in Spain, but he's one of the people that go to the Brussels European Commission meetings a lot. And I actually asked him, so what's actually happened in context of, so to me, the Raw Materials Act came out, and it's right, they finally take it seriously, hit the ground running. What have they done? Now, to open, Europe's very anti-mining. It's extraordinary anti-mining. And the entire European continent has serious money problems. We're all saturated in debt. What little money we had, we've given to the Ukraine war. So if we were to, and the sentiment against mining is epic. The suggestion that we should put up a mine, for example, in somewhere in France or in Germany, you get burned at the stake for heresy.
Has the sentiment not improved over the last couple of years, though, since people have started coming around to your ideas?
So on one hand, yes. Sure, yes. But then when you actually sort of go through the process of actually starting something, no, not here, no. And so not my backyard, especially since we don't have to when we can buy stuff off the market that's made in China, which defeats the whole purpose. The people on the ground have yet to establish the link. They understand it intellectually, some of them, they're meant to, but they don't understand emotionally to the point where they get their ass off the sofa and do something about it. Right, so it would be a very big deal to open a single mine in Europe. It would be big news. There'll be a lot of contention. But we're talking of opening thousands of mines quickly.
Right.
That's what that means.
Zero to 1,000.
Oh, well, I don't know what the true number is.
Yeah, but playing off the old adage of 0 to 100.
Yeah, but it'll be more than 10 or 20, right? It'll be in the high hundreds at least. So the idea of more than 1,000, that's not necessarily unreasonable, right? It'll be a lot. At the same time, all 5 levels of the industrial value chain would have to manifest in Europe like we mean it. That is, exploration and mining, then it's smelting and refining of metal, then it's manufacturing of precursors, then it's manufacturing of finished goods, right? And then it's waste handling and recycling. So we do waste handling and recycling pretty well compared to the rest of the world, but nowhere near at those levels. But the rest of it, there is a little bit of smelting here in Europe, but since we've lost the Russian gas supply and it's not coming back, and we've now got American gas, which is 4 times the price coming in on ships, and that gas chart that we looked at tells me that the Americans can deliver gas volumes for a short term, but not necessarily for a long term. There'll come a point when they're required to keep the gas for themselves to rebuild their own infrastructure. Right, so if Europe needs to do something, and my purple transition, if I've got it into the hands of the German government, they've done nothing with it. It's just too radical. But if they did it, it would mean they would not have to talk to the Americans or the Russians ever again. But we're not there yet. But
give them a few years, Simon. I'm sure they'll come around and say, "Oh, well, this was actually our plan." I mean, thank you for finally catching up with us. Samsung have put a thorium molten salt power system in a large ship, a natural gas carrier. So the technology's out. It's now in the West as well as China. So, okay, it's coming. Anyway, so what I'm getting at is a vast amount of work would be required to be put into Europe to get this going. They should have hit the ground running. The day after this thing was signed, while the ink was still wet, every geological survey in Europe, every mining company active in Europe, every engineering, procurement, management, and construction company would be sort of given notice. You now need to start putting some big plans on the ground. So the Americans, for example, they have come out the gate swinging and said, we've got to become self-sufficient in rare earth elements. What have they done? They put $4 trillion on the table saying, you will now fix this. And they're moving at velocity. Right? Everyone in that sector has been worked like dogs
but they'll do things. They'll disappear into a darkened room for 48 hours, and they'll come out with a $200 million proposal. They'll see something sort of come out of China, and they'll contact the right people, and there'll be a counter proposal on the table 24 hours later. They're doing it. So that's what Europe should have done. So what did they do? And so I've been asking everyone I come in contact with, so have you heard about any new mines? Have you heard about any new industrial plants? And the answer is, we're closing stuff down. So they are bringing online some of the planned renewable systems, like more solar panel units, more wind turbine units, and everything. So, but nowhere near the numbers that are in that chart. And there's, as far as I can tell, no new mining is planned at all. Now, the problem I have with this is this. Plans were made, said by 2030, according to the law, we're going to have this amount of stuff done. It's 5 years away. The incubation time for a mine site to go from a discovery out to a producing mine is, on a good day, 25 years, 25 years. There are exceptions to the rule, but in general, it doesn't happen in a few weeks or a few months. Right? It's years and years of work and permitting, and none of that is done. So we're out of time. And so what I'm now seeing is the voting public are now going to finally understand, because as we're approaching the deadline, the crunch time, and 2030 seems to be a very important. There's 2030 and 2050, but 2030 seems to be a crunch point. That's when the Great Reset was supposed to happen. The World Economic Great Reset.
Yep.
And there's going to come a point where we get to this point, and then it's crunch time, and the voting public will realize that nothing has been done. And then they'll say, well, maybe, nothing was really intended to be done. It says the whole thing for me is starting to look like a PR exercise to keep us occupied, a public relations exercise to keep the punters on the ground occupied. Stay at your posts, use your credit card. Your government's got it worked out.
And it also creates perception that the ruling class is actually trying to mitigate the situation.
Yeah.
So when the fingers start being pointed, they can say, "Well, we tried. We did everything we could."
Yeah.
But it was just an inevitable outcome.
And
Well, point in fact, it was just a distraction.
Yeah. And I think all the resources we put into the Ukraine war, imagine if we use them a bit more constructively. The Ukraine war has drained out all of the economic resources that we had. Finland was economically debt-free. And in quick succession, it had money in the bank. It gave, as I understand it, the Finnish government gave its money to the Ukraine war, joined NATO on advice from the World Economic Forum. Sweden followed suit, and now has gone into debt to the World Economic Forum to purchase more military equipment to fight the Russians. And now they've got like a debt to GDP ratio of 88% or something like that. Wow. How could you, in such a short time, they went from the strongest position in Europe to now they're in as deep trouble as anyone else. So the US dollar / European Union euro / the Chinese yuan, they're all fiat currencies, saturated with debt, trying very hard to correct. Currency debt default, meltdown, like a new currency system will take its place. You're seeing points, you can see markers for it, that it's being planned for. You can see it inferred.
You can see it in the gold price.
So, what it tells me that the people doing that won't come out and openly discuss what they're doing, tells me that the voting public on the ground are going to eat the losses. We're about to be hung out to dry.
Yeah, we're the big sacrificial lamb.
So that's where I'm at. I'm I've got analysis happening on multiple fronts, but that's where things are for me at the moment, where oil is the master resource. Oil is in trouble, and it's been in trouble for a couple of years. When things go sideways, I don't know. There's a lot of things. there's data on the ground to suggest that the tight oil sector actually peaked earlier this year in the United States. And I've seen other data to suggest that diesel fuel production may have peaked some months ago. And we just haven't noticed because of the economic destruction that we're in. Is that peak demand, or is that peak? I don't know. Too early to say.
Yeah. Well, it does solve one perceived problem, that is the overpopulation issue.
Yeah, that's an ugly one, isn't it? And so I also follow the. I've been following that for some time now. There's been policies in the own documentation of the very rich and powerful read the original limits growth report from 1972, and they actually sort of saw this is what happens, and there were 13 scenarios. And so no matter what we do, we have a population crash. What we can do is delay it, but we can't prevent it. And so well, those people are eating our resources. What do we do about that? And so this is the ultimate unethical. It is. There are a number of questions that we've got in our society at the moment, which is the ethical questions of our time. Like, historians will look back on this time and says, "You maniacs! What were you thinking? Do you realize this was in play?" You know how we look back to the 1930s in Germany and say, "Oh, there are all these ethical questions on the ground." And so, right, we're in another one of those, but we don't seem to see it yet.
No, not at all. Well, we've advanced so far so fast. I think the human mind has not caught up to the speed of advancement of technology. And I mean, it's only been like 3 generations removed from like a horse and buggy. No, 3 or 4 generations actually. So it's not like much time has passed since we've gotten like all these new toys to play with, but the moral capacity hasn't moved proportionally with it.
So there's also been a great deal of information that's sort of come in that the technology that's sort of come in has dumbed us down. Like, as a society, we're now swamped with vast quantities of low quality information, and we're not using that information. We're not all philosopher kings now. We watch TikTok instead.
Quantity, not quality.
Yes, but also it's becoming apparent that the population is now educated at greater levels than ever before. Now, while we've been heavily manipulated by propaganda, we're becoming wise to what that propaganda is. Stuff that a century ago we would never have believed possible, because they wouldn't do that, is now to the point, okay, they would do that. And propaganda as a tool is now sort of out. We're starting to see it at an individual level. So once we socially evolve past the point where propaganda is not as effective, and we have situation awareness and the ability to determine what's real and what's not at a discernment level and an instinct discernment level, then the whole thing of propaganda will lose its teeth as a tool to push us around. And so who really rules our society, and what do they want? And
or you can just get people just throwing their hands up in the air and saying, I don't even know what's real anymore. I don't know what to believe. Is everything a psyop? Yep. And just check out. Like,
which means they do nothing. They do nothing. Exactly.
You flood the zone. You flood the zone with so much disinformation, misinformation, bullshit. Just all this stuff that's just nonsense that you confuse the human mind. I'm sure there's truth in the mix there, but you mix the truth with all of these falsehoods, and then like people just don't have the capacity to muddle through all the nonsense to figure out what's the truth.
Did you see the TV series 3 Body Problem?
No.
Okay, if science fiction's your thing, have a look, because what it's an alien species decides to come to Earth, science fiction, but they're not peaceful, and what they realize is human beings are. Is
it a book?
It is a book, but it's also a series on Netflix.
I see.
Right, so the human beings are evolving faster than they are. So even though they're more advanced than human beings now, by the time they get to Earth, human beings will closing. Right now. The reason I say this is their solution was to slow humans down, to corrupt their science at the quantum atomic level, and flood our science with rubbish answers, where we actually cannot tell the difference of what's a real scientific outcome and what's rubbish. And so the real information's in there, but we can't discern the difference between the rubbish.
Right.
And that's kind of what we're at the moment. So much information is coming at us. But we see it on social media. How many times did we see, for example, a statement that went as follows: next week, Tuesday, about 6 o'clock, after tea time, Israel will strike Iran.
Oh, yeah.
And they go, whoa, okay, we're off. Okay. But of course, if you really were going to do that, you wouldn't say so. Like Trump is going to send tomahawks to Ukraine. And of course, the Russians, we will respond, and we're going to nuke your ass. Right. So if they really were going to do that, they'd just do it, not tell anyone.
And it creates readiness fatigue with the public.
It also, the people who do attempt to try and, prepare and be ready, if they make the mistake of telling their friends and families, they're made to look like idiots. And so they're written off as cranks by the very people that they would seek to protect and prepare for. And so it's a rather insidious structure. So
I wonder if the author of that book was inspired by real life tactics happening on the ground right now.
It's quite a sophisticated story. And to me, there's a lot of innovative ideas. And science fiction in general is very useful like this, because they do bring about ideas to discuss that are actually sort of quite interesting. So I believe, for example, that remember a couple of years ago there was so much anti-Russian sentiment around. We're going to war. Russians, Russia. Never happened. Right? And so it's like we were being prepared for war and riled up for war. The Chinese society has been preparing for war for 20 years. And they've actually been preparing for it psychologically as well. Hasn't happened yet. Right? So I'm going to put a theory to you to see what you think about this. So the systems that we've been looking at for the last 20, 30 years now are international in basis. But they're not based in one country anymore. They're actually international. You could say the leadership of the system could exist in a country. Like the United States, you could say, well, they lead that particular faction. But really, they're international. Yeah, right. So in 2016, the wrong person won the election and shocked the hell out of everyone. Donald Trump won. In the world that everyone understood, Hillary Clinton should have won that election, according to the rules they normally would engage in. Right. So at that point, a civil war started up, or a civil war became visible within the administration of the United States. Now, prior to 2008, there was one group, one plan. Now, this is the conspiracy theory world. They call it the New World Order. We're going to create a world government with a world cashless currency, a world police force, one tax code all over the planet. All armies will be folded into the global police force, and there's going to be factions. There's going to be groups. There's going to be the European Union. There's going to be the North American Union. There's going to be the African Union and the Pacific Union. Right. That was the plan. And in 2008, it happened. I believe the plan fractured, and when they tried to roll it out, it miscarried. Right. What I believe happened was when you actually look at who was doing exercises, and at the time,
why did it split? Why was there a fracture in 2008? Okay,
so the idea was there's going to be economic crash. They were rolling out swine flu at the same time. Fear. Then there was going to be a big military engagement, and the whole thing was going to completely reset society. But it was going to be one thing after another. If you remember the swine flu vaccine,
yeah.
Right, same basic profile as COVID.
2009?
Yeah, 2009. So 2008 was the economic crash. 2009 was the swine flu thing. Then the next step was going to be a big military engagement. That's when they were opening up all the FEMA camps all over America. They were all resourced, and all the conspiracy theory people were going nuts. and the economic crisis was in progress, but they stopped it from falling for some reason. I never understood why they stopped it.
Yeah. And then DHS was buying like tens of millions of bullets.
Yep, that's right. And hollow point bullets as well.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff that they couldn't use internationally. Hello.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So at the time, the American Department of Homeland Security, this was before the DHS was formed, I think, the government of America was running a series of exercises. And when you actually look at the military exercises, it's like a tell. They were running a series of exercises that a dirty bomb was deployed in the city of Portland. Right? The city of Portland. And they said, we're going to blame, the Iranians will be blamed. And so they were going to model out, this is what happened. Economic crash. We're now going to war, World War III. Iran will be blamed. The tragedy on American soil will be so large, it can't be stopped, and away we go. In 2009, there was a B-52 found abandoned, well, it's just sitting on a runway with no people, no paperwork, no nothing, at the Minot Air Base. The problem is, in its belly were 6 nuclear warheads. 6. Now, that doesn't just happen. They couldn't explain at the time why that was. Now, because of the safety protocols involved, that doesn't just happen. Right? So what I personally believe, this is intuitively putting it together, and you've got to sort of paint in the gaps a little here, is they were going to deploy a dirty bomb. They were going to make a dirty bomb out of that, out of those warheads. The people involved started to understand what they were taking part of, and they mutinied. We're not going to be part of that. And I do know some of the people who were involved in, putting that that load out there died in circumstances, and now their records are completely disappeared. You can't find them at all. Right, so that's about the time when the GFC was running its course. And they said, all right, it's not going to work. We don't have our false flag. It's all fallen over. Stop it. So they did the quantitative easing to turn it around. They then actually started to roll out the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TTP, the TPP, the TTIP, and the TISA. They were 3 corporate agreements between the corporations of the United States and the governments of the world, where they were going to integrate everything away from the BRICS economies into the United States. And it was going to be the replacement for the petrodollar. Where the petrodollar, if the US dollar's cooked and oil's on its way out, remember, fracking didn't save the day until 2009, so they didn't really know what was going to happen. And that was the Hail Mary that saved everything. So fracking saved the day. The false flag, if this theory is true, didn't happen. The Trans-Pacific Partnership started to falter. That came down to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks leaked the information, and the European Parliament got hold of it, and the whole thing failed.
Wow. So we were pretty close to,
I think there's several times
in 2008.
We were pretty close a couple of times in history. But from 2008 onwards, you started seeing the fractures. So a lot of them were small and behind the scenes. But in 2014, let's call them the cabal. The mafia, organized crime oligarch, whatever you want to call them, that are international and based in form, and are using the existing system to drain everyone else's money, make a lot of money, and they've got power and all the rest of it. They're international. So the first time that they were challenged openly was when the Russians were invited into Syria to start bombing ISIS. ISIS was an American action, or American, Saudi, Israeli action. They weren't Islamic terrorists at all. They were a mercenary force. They were funded from Saudi Arabia. They were managed from Qatar. They were trained in Jordan by Americans, and they had Israeli medical treatment. And which is why they appeared out of nowhere and got so far so quickly. And they always seem to be given state-of-the-art satellite intelligence. And so the Russians turned up, and well, what are you going to do? but that was the and the Russians prepared to do that, because if once Syria fell, the next target for ISIS was going to be to radicalize the Muslim population of Russia. And so that would be a problem internally. So they'd rather fight that adversary in Syria as opposed to their own homeland, which is why they were there.
Mm-hmm.
And Syria also came down to the choice between two gas pipelines to feed Europe. One went through Syria, which was a Russian ally, and one went through
Qatar and Turkey.
Qatar and Turkey, but they both went through Syria. And so Syria actually chose which of these pipelines they were going to support.
Oh, yes.
Right. And so, which is why, that's why the Russians were there. It's why the Saudis and the Americans were pissed at the Syrians, and it's why the Syrian war happened. And so anyway, so we started seeing cracks, and then groups started sort of fighting each other. The Maidan revolution in Ukraine in 2014, around the same time, was a color revolution. It was an American-backed color revolution in Ukraine to destroy the pro-Russian government at the time. And so from that point on, a series of actions were happening in Ukraine that were really, we'd call them war crimes. And we supported them. Right. And so when the shooting actually started, which I think it was, when did the current Ukraine war start? Like 2018, 2017, something like that?
2014, actually, with the Maidan coup.
Yeah, that's the Maidan coup, but it wasn't until about 7 or 8 years later that the Russians actually invaded. And
the Russians invaded in 2022.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I was looking for. So 2022, but there was a history behind that conflict, which we were involved at a strategic level. Like when we actually look at some of the actions that we as a democracy have been part of and have been done in our name, are we really the good guys? And so the answer is there are no good guys. So for me, the countries around the world that have natural resources and fossil fuels, they will know the true status of their reserves. So, Russia will know the status of its oil. Saudi Arabia will know the status of its oil and gas, as will Iran. So if peak oil really was 2018, right, at that point, they'll say, right, all fossil fuel systems will now have to be revalued. Right, and so everyone in concern, like the Americans would probably know the true status, but all the private companies themselves would actually know the true status of their reserves. We're not getting the good information. That's been proven a couple of times now. So if we're on this plateau of oil production for the last 10 years and we're bringing as much online as we can, but we're having trouble raising capital because our financial systems are now in trouble as well, right? And oil is the master resource. What happens? So what happens when things start contracting even a little? And the real problem is not the contraction. It's the public perception of the contraction, which is why you hear phrases like, when all else fails, they take us to war. So they're trying to amp up the anti-Russian sentiment again to take us to war. I don't see any reason for that, like this, but they're going to do it anyway. So the theory I'm putting together is instead of having, say, one big gigantic war faction against another big gigantic faction, you've got two or three international factions that are all over the world. When Trump won in 2024, one of those factions decisively won. Since then, we're seeing the night of the long knives. One side is cleaning house. The other side is doing everything it can to slow it down. But it's a different kind of conflict now. If that is true, that there is the idea of international factions, right, and the power structures have been in place for 50 years, a theory I'm putting forward, it's a theory to, instead of saying, this is what I think, I've got 3 or 4 options, and this is one of them. That they're going to start a war, not to defeat the visible enemy, but to clean up their geopolitical opponents around the world. Right, so the United States goes to war with Russia and China, and military actions start happening in Russia and China and the United States. Boom, bang, whatever. Right. But what's really happening? Is it the Russians striking the United States, or is it one faction in the United States in a civil war against another faction that they don't want the public to understand what's really happening? And that we're seeing military actions being moved around on the domestic territory. Oh, no, we can't have that.
I actually, this is very interesting you bring this up. I just got done interviewing Professor Jiang earlier today, and he was bringing up the fact that these attacks on these Venezuelan cartels aren't really attacks on Venezuela per se, that there could be a hidden veneer where these are all inter-intelligence agency attacks. Because if you look at the CIA's involvement in the drug trade, I mean,
Yep.
they were involved knee deep, neck deep into the drug trade. So are they really attacking drug cartels, or are they attacking a faction within the CIA to clean out their opposition?
And once you actually sort of unpack that, when is the world as clean cut as the nation state of the United States has a boundary, and everything in the United States is the United States, and everything outside the United States is the rest of the world? Or do you have entities within the United States that have their footprints all over the place, and you've got entities like China that have their footprints and assets inside the United States in a fifth dimensional, multi-stage, multi-scope conflict? Now, the public are being kept in a state of fear and anxiety. What if we are being kept in a state where, so we don't put it together, because it's a relatively small group of people, and if we work it out, and if we identify who it is, we'll clean them out and they'll never gain power again. And that's probably what they're most scared of. And in fact, the adversaries and the groups fighting each other would be in total agreement to make sure us, the herd, should go back to sleep so it could be harvested. So when I say harvested, what do I mean by that? Okay, the health system. On one hand, we are living longer than ever before. On one metric, we're healthier than ever before. But from a very early age now, most people have medical problems that require medical assistance of all kinds. We have from childhood now. We are needing medical assistance that's expensive, and so we've got we're like a herd that's being harvested. We live longer, but across our lifetime, we need many interventions from the medical system that drain a vast amount of money from us. We are being harvested. Money, power. And so when you look at things from a certain perspective, who are really our leaders, and do they really control the situation? Like the democratically elected leaders all over the world, the politician class, are they really in control? Or is there another layer of control? And is that layer of control allowed to, is it democratically accountable to anyone? What's the footprint of a large hedge fund? Mm-hmm. And what about the ethical actions of that hedge fund? We're not even allowed to know who owns them because they sit behind international tax havens. So the average person's starting to work this out now.
But is it too little, too late?
I think humanity was always going to do it the hard way. We're lazy. But I also think that the human species has the remarkable capacities to innovate in the face of adversity and will step up to the challenge. Now, what gives me a lot of hope is what I call group consciousness. So is evolving. So there's the consciousness as me as a person and you as a person, but we're part of a larger social group that is evolving. And you can see that, for example, that certain subjects can now be discussed openly with strangers down at the supermarket that would have been taboo with your closest friends 5 years ago. We are socially evolving fast. Is
that Carl Jung's collective consciousness?
Could be. There's a lot of names for it. I don't know if we can pin it down to be such a tight economic profile.
It's like the 100 monkey effect, right? For those who aren't aware, like once,
but whole parts of the business model behind our society are so far behind our scientific understanding. Like when like a group of physicists and chemists sat down with economists to compare models, this was like a couple of decades ago, the scientists were appalled that our economic model was not matching physical reality at all. And so we don't care. We're rich. And we're going to stay rich. And we pay for you. That was the answer.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. Anyway, so I actually think that humanity will rise to the occasion. There's a vast amount of effort to keep us in fear and anxiety. And I think if we choose not to, we don't have to. Because some of these, now, we don't have to go to war if we don't stand for it, for example.
Yeah, but they can easily, but humanity is also very limbic right now. So
to a point,
they know how to pull the strings. All it takes is just one crazy event, or
so yeah, true. So we are seeing a vast amount of manipulation that's been very effective over the years, and it's really hard to get past that. We're being played like someone might play a piano, right? But what's happening is we are growing in sophistication. Our systems are very fragile, but all that has to happen is a small proportion of our knowledge is transferred to the next era. And if we do that, well, the bad guys have not won.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Well, all right, my friend. I think that's a good place to cap things off. Anything else you want to talk about that we didn't get into before we sign off?
Lots is happening. I'm evolving stuff all over the place. As time goes on, I'm increasingly positive about the future for a small group of people who get it. And I want to find those people and work with them. Everyone else is on their own. But the future is ultimately positive.
Yeah, we are in a secular bull market for humanity nonetheless. We're just facing a small correction. Maybe not a small correction, but a correction nonetheless.
A correction.
All right. Where can people find you, Simon?
Okay, I have 3 websites now. So my conventional website, simonmichaux.com, if you put them in the notes in the chat, that shows all my professional work, published work. Then I've got Promethean, let me just get it up so I can actually read it properly. Promethean-nexus.com. So PROMETHEAN-NEXUS.com. That's actually my plan going forward with regard to what our society could become if we were to build different tools. On top of that, I have vulcancatalyst.com, all one word, vulcancatalyst.com. And that is a venture capitalist industrial project to raise revenue to sell cheap electricity and cheap diesel fuel. Those 3 websites are where my work is at the moment, and that's what I can see happening as useful work for the next few years going forward.
Excellent. Thank you, good sir. It's been a pleasure as always. Hearing from you. So hopefully we can do it again before the end of the year as well. Guys, if you enjoyed this podcast, I know we covered a lot of ground, but if you did enjoy it and you got value, and quite frankly, I don't know how you wouldn't get value, but if you did get value, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment, "Go, Simon, go" in the comment section. If you agreed or disagreed, either way is fine, but you've got to let me know what you agreed or disagreed on and why. I do, in fact, read all the comments. I can't respond to each and every one of them, but I do read them all. So drop me your thoughts down below. I will get to it. And
I like to meet your critics too. So comments are welcome. Negative comments are welcome, because what you're doing is training my next generation of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So let me know your thoughts, guys. And by liking, subscribing, commenting, doing all the YouTube stuff, you do help in pushing us up in the algorithm, whether it be through this video or through this channel. So if you'd like this message to get out to as many people as possible, that's one way to do it. And it's free. Everyone's favorite 4-letter F word, free. And so with all that said, check us out at capitalcosm.substack.com to get access to all my stuff early and ad-free. And I will catch you later. Bye.